All right. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into sourcing in 2025,
Hmm.
specifically Vietnam versus China. It's got some really interesting research here, and I'm excited to really kind of unpack it all with you. Hopefully, by the end, you'll have some actionable insights,
Yeah.
no matter where you are in your sourcing journey.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. It's a tough choice, isn't it? It's almost like picking between pho and dim sum. Both are delicious, but very, very different
Oh,
experiences.
now you're making me hungry.
Hmm.
But yeah, I get what you mean. Both countries, they've got their own unique advantages, and it seems like from what I've been reading here, it's gonna be a real showdown in the next few years.
It really is. You have China, the giant, the dragon. They've been dominating the manufacturing scene for decades now.
But Vietnam, they're coming up right behind them,
Yeah.
fast,
Yeah.
and we're seeing that especially in things like textiles and electronics. They're really building a reputation for quality.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is they're not just copying China. They're not just saying, "Okay, we're gonna do exactly what they're doing." They're learning from China, definitely, but they're adapting. They're blending technology in their own way, and they've got a very cost-effective workforce too.
So it's not just robots taking over in Vietnam. It's like a blend of that high tech and the human touch, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a really interesting example in the footwear industry, for instance. They're using AI-powered design tools, which really speeds things up. But then for the really detailed work, the hand stitching, the kind of craftsmanship that luxury brands want, they're keeping those skilled workers.
Wow. That's fascinating. So it's like a new path. It's not just the
Yeah.
the China playbook.
Right, it's their own thing. And I think that's one of their biggest assets actually, that they can adapt so quickly. They're meeting the demands of the global market and kind of, changing with it.
So it's like we have China going for that large scale, high tech, production. And then Vietnam is kind of like playing a different game almost.
Exactly. And that's something that, our listeners really need to think about, when they're making sourcing decisions. Think about what what are you sourcing? How complex is it? Do you need, that human touch? Or is it something that can be fully automated?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, is there? You really have to know your own situation.
Right. Now let's dig into some more practical stuff. Let's talk money. Cost is always a big factor in these decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And China, well, they've always been known for their low labor costs,
Yeah.
but that's not really the case anymore, is it?
It's changing, yeah.
Yeah.
Their costs have been going up steadily. They've got a strong economy and the workforce is shrinking,
Yeah.
So while they still have a lot of skilled labor, it's not as cheap as it used to be.
And how does Vietnam compare there on the cost side?
Yeah. They are still significantly cheaper. Particularly, if you're looking at industries that need a lot of manual labor, their wages are rising too, of course. I mean, their economy's doing well, but they're still much lower than China's.
Okay, so for businesses that really need to watch every penny, Vietnam is still looking really good, but of course cost isn't the only thing, right? What about quality? I mean, China has that reputation for producing high quality goods. Have they been doing it for so long? Can Vietnam really match that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, China, they have the experience. They've got these really well-developed systems for quality control. But Vietnam is catching up. I mean, fast. They're putting a lot of investment into it. They're training their workforce. They're adopting international standards. They're really serious about it.
Yeah, and one of the sources we had actually, it had this really interesting anecdote about this woman who was she was making a hat. It was this traditional Vietnamese workshop, not like a big sterile factory or anything, but the dedication to quality.
Mm.
It was just incredible. You could really see it.
That's a great example of how they're blending the old and the new, the traditional skills with the modern techniques. It's not just mass production. There's real care there.
So it seems like Vietnam is really they're stepping up in the quality department.
Yeah.
And yeah, China might still be ahead in experience, but Vietnam is definitely one to watch.
Absolutely. And I think what's most exciting is that they're not just trying to be like China but cheaper, They're finding their own way.
Yeah, they're making their own path.
Exactly. They're they're
Yeah.
they're building on their strengths and becoming a real player on the global stage.
All right. So we talked cost, we talked quality. There's another big one, right?
Hmm.
Infrastructure. I mean, China, they've got this amazing infrastructure. You know, the ports, the roads, the logistics. It's world class. How's Vietnam doing there?
Yeah, China's infrastructure is really impressive. It's a big reason why they've been, the top dog for so long. But Vietnam, they're investing a lot of money trying to catch up.
They're building new highways, right?
Yeah,
And upgrading ports and all that.
exactly. Yeah, it'll take time, of course. They're not there yet, but
Right.
but they're moving in the right direction. And what's interesting is they're focusing on connecting, their key economic regions, the industrial zones. So it's a strategic approach.
So they're being smart about it.
Yeah.
They're focusing on what will really make a difference for their manufacturing sector.
Yeah, that's right. And for you, the listener, what that means is that, China might still have the overall edge, but Vietnam's catching up. And particularly if you're sourcing certain types of products or if you're operating in specific regions in Vietnam, it might be a good option for you already.
So it's not just, looking at the big picture. It's really you got to understand the details, the specifics of each country.
Absolutely. And things change so quickly. What's true today might not be true next year.
So you got to stay flexible, right?
Oh.
And stay up to date on what's happening.
For sure. All right, so let's move on to some actual advice. What
Yeah.
does all this research tell us? What should businesses be doing as we head towards 2025?
Yeah, let's get to the bottom line here. What's the expert take?
Well, like what we were saying before, it really depends on your own needs. Your priorities. One of the sources called it the Great Sourcing Showdown, which I thought was pretty accurate.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. So, China, they're still the leader for certain things. If you're sourcing something complex, high tech, something that needs really advanced manufacturing, China's still the place to be.
So, electronics, automotive parts, that kind of stuff. Things that,
Yeah.
that really need that high level of technology and precision.
Right. But if you're looking for something more cost effective and maybe, something that needs a bit more of a human touch, that's where Vietnam starts to, really shine.
So textiles, furniture,
Oh, yeah.
things like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. And their workforce is so adaptable. They're willing to learn new technologies so they can really, change with the market.
And I think something really important here is diversification.
Hmm.
Not putting all your eggs in one basket, as they say.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Maybe source some things from China, some things from Vietnam. That way you're spreading the risk.
Exactly. You're not relying on one country for
Yeah.
everything.
Now let's talk a little bit more about Vietnam specifically. Why are they attracting so much attention? What's making them so attractive right now?
Yeah, we've talked about some of it already. The costs, the quality, the infrastructure. But there's got to be more to it than that.
Oh, there is. There's definitely more. I think there's this drive. They've got this young workforce and they're eager to learn. The government is very supportive of foreign investment and they're really integrating into the global supply chains.
So it's more than just the numbers, isn't it? It's that whole vibe, that feeling.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the sources even said that, Vietnam's future in global sourcing is looking incredibly bright.
So maybe we should all start learning Vietnamese, huh?
Uh-huh. Maybe. So before we move on, let's just take a quick recap. What are the main takeaways here for our listeners, as they try to navigate this sourcing showdown?
Okay, let's summarize. We've got two strong players. China, they're still the powerhouse, especially for those, high-tech, complex products.
Right. They've got the experience, the technology. And Vietnam, they're the up-and-comer, offering that mix of cost effectiveness and improving quality,
Yeah.
particularly in, textiles, furniture, footwear, those kinds of things.
And both countries are changing all the time. So staying informed, being flexible, that's crucial.
Absolutely. And don't just go for the cheapest option, Think about your needs, your specific sourcing needs.
Right. Think about the bigger picture. All right. So that's the groundwork. We've looked at the key factors and we've heard some expert recommendations. Before we wrapped up this first part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Yeah. So based on what we've talked about so far, where do you see the biggest opportunities in sourcing in the next few years, And how can you use the strengths of both China and Vietnam to really build a winning sourcing strategy? Keep those questions in mind. as we continue our exploration.
It's really fascinating to see just how much things are changing, in the sourcing world. I mean, for years it was pretty much all about China.
Yeah, they were the undisputed champ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now with Vietnam coming up so strong, well, it's getting a lot more interesting, wouldn't you say?
It's like a whole new ball game, and it's not just about finding the lowest price anymore. Vietnam's really proving that they can compete on quality, on speed,
Yeah.
on being innovative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's creating some really great opportunities for businesses that are willing to look beyond China and really think strategically.
And speaking of exploring those new options, one of the sources we had, it mentioned this really cool example of furniture makers who were actually sourcing parts from both China and Vietnam.
Oh yeah, that's a smart strategy.
Mm.
They might get the raw materials or maybe some of the basic components from China because, well, China's still got that edge when it comes to infrastructure
Yeah.
and being able to produce things on a huge scale.
Right. And then they ship those components over to Vietnam, where they do the final assembly, the
Yeah.
finishing touches,
Yeah.
taking advantage of Vietnam's lower costs and their skilled workers.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're creating this hybrid model, getting the best of both worlds.
And it just shows that sometimes the best solution isn't just picking one country or the other.
Mhm.
It's thinking outside the box and finding ways to leverage the unique strengths of each place.
And it also shows that Vietnam is really becoming a key part of the global supply chain. They're not just competing with China, they're working with them.
Yeah.
In a way.
It's like a more interconnected system
Mm.
where everyone has a role to play.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the positives of Vietnam, but we should also talk about, some of the challenges because, well, no place is perfect, right?
There's always going to be some bumps in the road.
Exactly. So I think one of the biggest challenges for Vietnam right now is infrastructure. They're investing a lot to improve it, but they're still behind China.
So things like the roads, the ports, the whole logistics system, it's not as smooth and efficient as it is in China.
Right. And that can mean, delays, higher transportation costs, and even disruptions to your supply chain. So it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Businesses need to be prepared for that. Maybe build in some extra time.
Yeah.
Just in case there are hiccups along the way.
Yeah, good planning is key. Another challenge is finding skilled labor. Vietnam's got a young workforce, which is great, but there's a growing demand for people with specific skills, especially in things like engineering and technology.
So it might be harder to find those highly specialized workers in Vietnam compared to China, which has, a much larger pool of experienced people.
Exactly. And that's something that businesses need to think about. Maybe they need to invest in training programs or work with local schools and universities to help develop those skills.
It's not enough to just set up shop and expect everything to be ready to go. You got to be willing to invest in the local workforce.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the companies that do that, the ones that really commit to Vietnam, they're the ones that are gonna reap the rewards in the long run.
So Vietnam, it's got a lot going for it, but it's not without its challenges. You gotta be aware of those and have a plan to deal with them.
Exactly. Do your research. Talk to experts. Don't just jump in blindly.
That's what we're here for, to help you make sense of it all. And hopefully, by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much better understanding of the whole sourcing landscape.
And all the different factors that you need to consider.
Now, I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about something that we often forget about in all these discussions about sourcing. And that's the human element.
Oh, that's so important. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the costs, the logistics. But at the end of the day, it's about people.
It's about building relationships,
Yeah.
working together, creating opportunities that benefit everyone.
Absolutely. And I think that's an area where Vietnam really excels. There's this sense of partnership, a willingness to go the extra mile.
It's like they're really invested in your success, not just fulfilling an order.
Exactly. And that can make a huge difference, especially if you're looking to build those long-term relationships.
So it's not just about what you're sourcing, it's about who you're sourcing it with.
Right. You want to find partners who share your values, who
Yeah.
are committed to to ethical practices,
Yeah.
to sustainable growth.
It's about creating a supply chain that you can be proud of.
Couldn't agree more. And that's something I really hope our listeners will think about. Don't just focus on the bottom line. Think about the impact you're having on people's lives, on the environment.
It's about making a difference, making the world a better place, while still, running a successful business.
Exactly. And I think Vietnam is going to play a big part in that movement towards more ethical and sustainable sourcing.
Yeah, I think so too. They're on the right track with their focus on quality,
Yeah.
on innovation, on building those strong relationships. It's a winning combination.
Yeah. It's funny. I keep thinking back to that analogy we used earlier about pho and dim sum.
Oh yeah, the food. I always love a good food analogy.
Well, it just struck me that choosing between China and Vietnam for sourcing, it's not really about saying, okay, this one is better. It's more like recognizing that they both have something unique to offer.
Yeah, like creating a really well-balanced meal, right? You might have your pho for your main course, but then you have some delicious dim sum for dessert.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about sourcing in today's world. There's room for everyone, for all these different approaches, all these different strengths.
So it's not about competition. It's about collaboration. It's about finding those synergies that create a richer, more vibrant, more sustainable sourcing ecosystem for everybody.
Well said. I think that's a perfect way to sum it up. We started with this dilemma, and now we've arrived at a delicious solution.
Embrace the diversity. Explore all the options. And build a sourcing strategy that really works for you.
And hey, maybe you'll even learn some Vietnamese along the way.
Now, before we completely wrap up this deep dive, I have one final thought-provoking question for you, our listener. As we wrap up our deep dive here, focusing on sourcing in 2025, this whole Vietnam versus China thing, I'm kind of curious, what advice would you give to someone who's, just starting out? They're just beginning to explore these options. Where do they even begin?
That's a really good question. It's kind of like, asking someone, should I learn piano first or guitar? It really depends on what kind of music you want to play,
Okay, yeah. I like that analogy. So you're saying don't get caught up in the country first. Start with the product, the industry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You gotta know yourself first. What are you actually sourcing? What are your quality standards? What's your budget like? What are your ethical considerations? All that stuff.
So really, really understand your own business first, your own products, and then see how those needs match up with either China or Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly. Once you've got that clear picture of what you need, then you can start looking at, okay, how does China fit into this? How does Vietnam fit into this?
And that's where resources like the research we've been looking at today, that's where they can really come in handy.
For sure. They can give you that deeper understanding of, what each country is good at, what the challenges are, so you can make a more informed decision.
And I think don't be afraid to reach out to people. Talk to experts, talk to consultants, talk to other businesses who've actually done this. Get their insights.
Oh yeah, that's invaluable. You can learn so much from people who've been there, done that, made mistakes.
And remember, this isn't, a one-time decision. Things change so fast in the sourcing world.
Oh, constantly.
So you got to be ready to adapt. To change your strategy if you need to.
Stay agile, stay informed, keep learning.
Now, before we wrap up completely, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. This idea of diversification.
Ah, yes, spreading the risk.
Exactly. Why is that so important, especially now as we're, looking ahead to 2025?
Well, because by sourcing from both China and Vietnam, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're making your supply chain more resilient.
So it's not about picking a winner. It's about using both countries strategically to create a stronger, more flexible sourcing setup.
Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about sourcing today. You've got all these options, all these possibilities. It's really up to you to create the best strategy for your business.
So as we close out this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I would say the future of sourcing, it's full of potential. It's dynamic, and by understanding your needs, being strategic, and being open to all these different options, you can really succeed. You can build a sourcing strategy that works for you, that helps you grow.
That's a great message to end on. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Mhm.
Until next time.
Yeah.